right, and joining us in the studio now is international relations expert Abel Oyieyo, who joins us to discuss the top stories that have made global headlines this week from Kenya's Foreign Affairs CS Amina Mohamed, who lost, of course, the position of AU Commission Chair to Chad's Mohammed. We also have just yesterday the International Court of Justice there ruling that it is within its jurisdiction to rule on the maritime border case between Kenya and Somalia. And of course, we'll also be discussing the Al-Shabaab attack on KDF, which happened on Friday dawn last week, and the Al-Shabaab attack which happened at a police post in Mandera yesterday morning. Why this resurgence of attacks by Al-Shabaab? And of course, Trump's immigration policy. Kenya's neighbor Sudan, they're among the list of 7 nations that have been blacklisted. And last but not least, we'll be discussing the Brexit talks that have kicked off in high gear. So let's speak to Abel Oyieyo. Many thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's begin with our first thing on the agenda here is Amina Mohamed's loss to Mohammed. I mean, a lot has been said about this, from the betrayal of African countries, from the manner in which Kenya lobbied for that position. What are your thoughts, especially on how Amina Mohamed responded to the loss?
Well, the response was gracious. Of course, she didn't come out as bitter. But as a nation, of course, it was unexpected. So many people expected Amina to win. Of course, the first time when she was not part of the process, it's like there was no candidate for the position. So when she came in, she fit the bill. So he is a candidate who comes in with all the credentials, all the experience that is required, and then she goes ahead and loses. And then, of course, there's the element of so much in terms of diplomacy. The president, deputy president invested a lot of resources in trying to lobby African countries to support the CS, but it never worked.
Right.
For some reason, it never worked. So I think it's some sort of backlash from some countries that were, of course, they felt like they couldn't be taken care of by Amina.
Right, and so, the tragedy here is that these countries are countries very close to Kenya.
Yeah.
Kenya had counted largely on their support, the likes of Uganda, Burundi, Djibouti. And Amina Mohamed has been very categorical that this will not affect relations. But Kenya needs to rethink its friends. I mean, what does that statement itself mean?
Now, there's been a problem between Kenya and its neighbors, including Uganda, of course. And what we've been doing is to downplay that kind of conflict or friction between Kenya and its neighbors. So what we have is what we call superficial friendship. It doesn't go beneath the surface. And of course, we're talking about supranational kind of governance. It's beyond our borders. So countries move in defense of their interests. So when they look at Kenya and find some kind of maybe opposition or some kind of adversarial relationship, they feel like, oh, Kenya cannot cater for our needs. So they have to look for that kind of interest in terms of defense, in terms of protection elsewhere. So I mean, of course, was from, I think, my perspective, was not coming in as the kind of person who can lobby for the entire East African region. So they had to focus on some other person.
Right,
yeah.
Right. And of course, there's been this common perception that back home in Kenya, not much was known about the process. Kenyans felt that this was a state project and not necessarily a Kenyan project. I mean, I'm not sure what the system or what the procedure should be, especially with the other candidates, but did you feel that, say, Kenyans were not included in this process?
Now, I think what was done was okay because the government must support its officials when they seek offices beyond the nation. So the effort by the president and deputy president was, I think, deserved. It was necessary. But I think they were a bit overzealous. They overdid it.
Right.
I think they visited close to 53 nations and whatever regions in search of support. So they overdid it. I don't think the diplomats and the government of Chad did as much as Kenya did.
Right.
And most likely it raised some questions. Why are they working so hard to get it? So some guys, I think, felt like, okay, if they're working too hard for it, it means there's something. So let's go to some place.
Right. I mean, so what does that mean for Kenya, especially with its standing in the African continent, and what lessons need to be learned here?
What we need to work on is our reputation as a country, of course, because there's so much has been said about corruption involving the secretary herself, and so much more. So I'm thinking some countries went in thinking, okay, this is an official who's so much tainted, and I don't think she should be the head of the AU.
Right.
So maybe that is the reason some countries decided to go to Chad. So we have to think about the reputation of the country, and then, of course, we have to think about our neighbors, our friends, who can stand by us when we need them.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Let's hope that actually happens. But let's move on to news that developed yesterday. The International Court of Justice was ruling on the maritime border case between Kenya and Somalia, and it did rule that it is within its jurisdiction to determine this case. But I understand that Kenya was very opposed to this decision because there was an MOU that had been signed before. What does it mean now for ICJ to be presiding over this case?
Well, I think the decision which was made by the International Court of Justice was expected because the MOU does not exclude any other processes for the resolution of the problem of the maritime conflict. So it was expected. Kenya should have expected that. And as we move forward, of course, we've been in charge of that area since 1979. And I think as such now, Somalia feels like it should take control of its territory. And as we move forward, I expect the second ruling to be, of course, on the side of Somalia. Our diplomacy has not been very good because had we worked so hard, Somalia couldn't have gone to the International Court of Justice in the first place. They could have now, come to us and we talk about that on a friendly basis.
Right.
So we made a mistake by letting it go to the ICJ in the first place. So you can expect them to be fair, and obviously at some point, I think they're going to ask Kenya to move. That's what's going to happen because of our failed diplomacy. I think, again, I'm going to blame the Foreign Affairs CS. She's not been so strong in terms of dealing with the issue. That is why it went way beyond what we cannot control.
I mean, and in terms of diplomatic relations between Kenya and Somalia, what impact is likely to be seen there?
That is a country I think Kenya has invested in so much, and you can see bad faith. They're not dealing with Kenya as friends, as people who've invested so much in terms of trying to make sure they're safe and all that. You can remember sometimes back, the first government which was formed, I think in 2012, was constituted in Kenya. Those guys came to Kenya and they even fought at 680.
Right.
Chairs flying and all that. So they've forgotten about all that and taken Kenya to the International Court of Justice. So that is the kind of friendship that cannot stand the test of time.
Right,
yeah.
right. And of course, the relationship between Kenya and Somalia, of course, continues with the war against terror. And that brings us to our next topic, which is the Al-Shabaab attack on KDF. That was on Friday last week, early morning on Friday. And then just yesterday, we had another Al-Shabaab attack on a police camp, a police base in Mandera. But let's begin with the attack in Somalia.
Yeah.
Dozens of soldiers were feared dead in that attack. Just this morning, just this month, we've had several generals who've been taken to account or being questioned over what really went wrong. But the issue was that lessons were not being learned from the attack that happened in Elade, which was rather similar.
Yes. So we have problems. And I think, from the attack itself, the reason as why it's happening at this particular point in time is Kenya is going to an election. And Al-Shabaab doesn't want Kenyan troops in Somalia. Right. Actually, they don't want any AMISOM troops remaining in Somalia. So the best way to pressure Kenya to pull out is to attack them when we're approaching an election. Now, I think you've heard the opposition guys talking about pulling troops out of Somalia because obviously that is the reason we have this kind of attacks, not just on Somalia, but in our homeland. So that is pressure they're trying to apply. And then, of course, we have a problem with our military, and we need to accept that. Transparency is a problem. And of course, training itself is a problem. Those guys last time were attacked when they were asleep. You cannot go to a place like Somalia and then, you sleep. That was a problem. We lost so many guys. And then, of course, when you lose all those guys, we expect our government to be very transparent that we've lost, let's say, 50 guys, and we mourn our soldiers. They're our children. We need to know we've lost a particular number of troops. So they told us 9 of them died. But according to the information that is now available, more than 16 guys died. So that's a lack of transparency, and I don't think it's okay. Kenyans don't deserve that.
Right.
When we lose our servicemen, we should know how many died, and then we should be held. Those responsible should be, of course, able to explain what happened, what went wrong.
But and, what's the relation between the fact that these Al-Shabaab attacks become more rampant while we head to the election? Case in point, the Al-Shabaab attack in Mandera yesterday morning, they destroyed Safaricom masts to cut off communication, a tactic that they have done before, but they also, as we are receiving reports, made away with several BVR kits. The question is, what does Al-Shabaab have to do with Kenya's electoral process?
So again, it goes back to pulling out troops from Somalia. They want to be left alone. So the pressure is to make sure the government gets the message and them from both Al-Shabaab and the opposition get out of Somalia. So I expect the government, of course, to stick in there and make sure the mission is completed. That is what it should be.
Right.
We cannot give in to terrorists. It cannot happen.
Okay.
But again, we need to make sure that there is sufficient defense. You can't just have guys there who keep on getting killed. We cannot allow that. So they should be there, yes. But then again, they should be supplied with the right equipment and sufficient training to at least defend themselves. Yeah.
I mean, and still focusing on terror, let's talk about Trump's immigration policy now of the ban on 7 predominantly Muslim countries. Sudan is among those countries. Yeah. And if you remember, just towards the end of Barack Obama's tenure, he lifted sanctions on Sudan. And then